Hollywood's golden age sold itself as a dream carved in celluloid. Smiling faces, perfect lighting, and promises of immortality. But behind the velvet curtains and flashing marquees, something far darker was festering. Decades later, Ron Howard, a man raised inside that dream, finally breaks the silence. Not as an accuser hungry for scandal, but as a witness burdened by memory. He speaks of men whose talent was undeniable, whose faces were worshipped by millions, and whose shadows left scars on everyone who stood too close. These were not villains on screen, but forces of fear, manipulation, and cruelty in private, actors whose power corrupted entire sets, whose tempers rewrote lives, whose secrets were buried to protect the illusion. As Howard's reflections unfold, the question becomes unavoidable. How many legends were built on suffering no one was allowed to name? And more unsettling still, why did it take so long for the truth to surface? What happens when the people we idolize are revealed to be the most dangerous figures in the room? Hollywood at its golden peak breathed like a living monument, all marble facades and blinding lights, a cathedral built to worship ambition. Studio gates opened each morning with mechanical precision, and inside them moved actors elevated beyond humanity, their faces immortalized while their flaws were carefully erased. The air on these sets shimmered with possibility, but beneath the hum of cameras and the polite applause of crews, there existed a tension so familiar it went unnamed. Ron Howard's omniscient recollections hover over these spaces like a quiet witness, observing how fear settled into routine, how cruelty learned to disguise itself as brilliance. On the surface, everything appeared disciplined and professional. But the silence between takes told a different story. Assistants learned to lower their eyes. Co-stars adjusted their laughter, measuring every reaction. Power moved invisibly, enforced not by rules, but by reputation. Certain men were untouchable. Their talent excused their temper. Their success reframed abuse as passion. When voices rose in anger, no one intervened. When doors slammed, no one followed. Fear was not sudden. It was methodical, taught through example, reinforced through consequences. Young actors arrived wide-eyed, hearts pounding with gratitude and awe. They had dreamed of this place. Yet within days, admiration collided with dread. They learned when to speak and when to disappear. They learned that opportunity could vanish without explanation. A role lost, a contract dissolved, a name quietly removed from call sheets. No accusations were written down. No records kept. Only whispers passed in hallways, warnings disguised as advice. Be careful, someone would say, without ever explaining why. Howard's perspective reveals the emotional compromise at the heart of the system. Crew members justified their silence by survival. Directors convinced themselves it was not their place. Executives weighed profits against people and chose the former with practiced ease. Each small decision hardened into policy, and the policy became culture. Abuse was no longer shocking. It was expected. The machine kept moving, polished and efficient, while damage accumulated in the shadows. Subtle signs appeared everywhere. An actress leaving a set in tears, never to return. A promising career stalling without cause. A veteran cameraman quietly requesting reassignment. These moments floated briefly, then disappeared, absorbed by the relentless forward motion of production. The audience never saw them. The myth remained intact. As the chapter closes, the illusion fractures. The realization settles with uncomfortable weight. These were not isolated flaws of difficult men, but symptoms of a system engineered to protect them. Monsters were not hidden in darkness. They stood under hot lights, applauded, defended, and rewarded. And as the camera lingers on those smiling faces, a deeper question forms, unresolved and unsettling. If this was only the beginning, how far did the darkness truly extend? Before their names were emblazoned on marquees, before their faces were plastered across magazine covers, these 6 actors were fragments of fragile beginnings, molded by circumstances that demanded resilience beyond their years. Poverty gnawed at some, while others endured homes where love was conditional, volatile, or absent. Howard's omniscient gaze traces these early lives with painstaking attention, revealing the invisible threads that would later tighten around anyone who dared cross them. The cruelty they would one day wield was born first as survival, a response to households steeped in neglect, where power was always seized or imposed. One actor, a boy of 12, learned early that a misstep invited humiliation so severe it etched itself into memory. Another, isolated by parental absence, discovered that controlling small spaces, the position of furniture, the timing of chores, was the only avenue to preserve dignity. Trauma, so early and unrelenting, became a language they spoke fluently, though silently, carrying it into adolescence like a loaded weapon. Howard's narration lingers over these formative years, emphasizing how fear and insecurity became inseparable companions to ambition. Every slight, every insult, every whispered comparison planted the seeds of domination that would flourish under Hollywood's spotlight. When these young men entered the industry, fame did not heal, it amplified. The studios, gleaming and vast, offered adoration in public but little guidance in private. Howard observes how unresolved wounds metastasized. Moments of personal vulnerability were treated as weakness to exploit, friendships were calculated, loyalty a currency to be measured. The psychological landscape becomes clear. Those who had once felt powerless now craved authority above all, meticulously orchestrating environments to ensure control, shaping others' emotions as deftly as they shaped their own performances. The narrative follows subtle, intimate details. The tremor in a hand as a boy rehearsed lines for an indifferent parent, mirrored years later in the set of a high-budget production. The glint of calculation behind wide, charming smiles that disarmed co-stars while leaving them uneasy. The careful calibration of charm and menace that became a signature, a survival mechanism refined into artistry. By the chapter's end, these origins are no longer abstract. They are the blueprint of future cruelty, a map that foreshadows the havoc they would wreak in Hollywood. As the lights of the studio begin to shine on their emerging careers, a shadow stretches behind them, silent but inevitable. Howard's voice lingers in the narration. These are not mere stories of talent or ambition. They are the birth of monsters, shaped by fear, propelled by unhealed wounds, and ready to leave indelible scars. The audience is left unsettled, knowing the young actors stepping into Hollywood carry darkness they cannot yet understand, poised to release it into a world unprepared to contain it. The lights were brighter than ever, reflecting off the polished marble of Hollywood's studio halls, but the brilliance of stardom concealed a profound loneliness. At the apex of their fame, these 6 actors were kings without peers, rulers of sets that had become their courts, yet surrounded by sycophants, assistants, and co-stars who measured every word, every glance, for fear of reprisal. Ron Howard's omniscient narration observes them in this isolation, their smiles perfect, their performances flawless, while their inner worlds trembled with anxiety, suspicion, and an unspoken hunger for control that no applause could satisfy. On set, every scene was a battlefield of emotional precision. Cameramen adjusted angles not only to capture the ideal shot, but to avoid drawing attention to moments of tension. Costume assistants moved silently, aware that a misplaced garment could provoke a tantrum laced with sharp words that cut deeper than any critique. Co-stars learned to anticipate moods like storm clouds. A slight smile today, a storm of rage tomorrow. For the audience, it was cinema magic. For those behind the cameras, it was an intricate dance of fear and appeasement. Howard reveals the paradox. Absolute power coexisted with total isolation. These actors trusted no one. Not their closest collaborators, not studio heads, not even their friends. Every compliment was questioned, every gesture analyzed, every interaction a potential threat to their carefully curated image. Loneliness manifested in subtle behaviors. Pacing corridors in silence, rehearsing lines repeatedly to feel in control, double-checking every appearance in mirrors, observing colleagues with the vigilance of someone anticipating betrayal. Addiction, both to substances and to the intoxicating influence over others, crept quietly into this solitude, amplifying the intensity of their presence while eroding the empathy that might have tethered them to humanity. Howard's narration pauses to linger on small, almost imperceptible moments. The way a hand trembles as it lifts a coffee cup, the sharp inhale before responding to a question, the cold precision in a compliment that masks condescension. Sets became stages of psychological warfare. Each exchange carried stakes invisible to outsiders. Crew members tolerated verbal assaults, whispered threats, and manipulations because survival demanded compliance. Directors turned blind eyes, executives calculated profit over morality, and the actors' isolation remained hidden behind red carpets and magazine covers. Yet even in this fortress of control, tension brewed. A single misstep, a single misinterpreted glance, could ignite a scene not meant for cameras. A moment where rage spilled unchecked, where the illusion cracked, and where silence was no longer an option. Howard foreshadows the inevitable unraveling. All kingdoms, no matter how seemingly secure, are vulnerable to collapse. The chapter closes on a tense, suspended frame. A heated confrontation on set, voices hushed but hearts racing, leaving the audience acutely aware that the empire of control these actors built may be on the brink of fracture. Every reign, no matter how meticulously constructed, carries the seeds of its own collapse. By now, these 6 actors, once young dreamers carrying trauma like hidden talismans, had ascended to untouchable heights, yet their dominion had begun to crack under the weight of their own cruelty. On set, the air vibrated with unspoken tension. Ron Howard's omniscient narration drifts over each room, each hallway, capturing the quiet terror of those who had endured manipulation for years. The cameras may have rolled endlessly, capturing only polished performances, but behind the scenes, moments of fracture went unrecorded. Doors slammed, whispers rose, and tempers flared with consequences no one dared predict. Howard recounts incidents that were never meant for the public eye. A young actress cornered by a torrent of verbal abuse, her voice trembling as she tried to justify a late cue. An assistant silently absorbing a tirade so vicious that their hands shook long after it ended. A co-star, exhausted and fearful, walking away from a set in tears, their career silently jeopardized. These were not isolated explosions. They were symptoms of long-cultivated cruelty, a mechanism perfected over decades of survival and ambition. Yet the public saw only perfection, applause, and red carpets. The disconnect between appearance and reality became unbearable. The psychological landscape of these actors is laid bare. Their loneliness had metastasized into paranoia. Every expression, every glance, every decision constantly scrutinized. Howard emphasizes how unresolved trauma, once personal, now dictated professional behavior. Addiction whispered promises of relief but delivered chaos. Trust became a liability, intimacy a danger. In their pursuit of dominance, empathy eroded, leaving in its place a landscape of fear and subtle sabotage. Crew members became chess pieces, co-stars pawns in a game no one could refuse to play. Each act of aggression, each silent punishment, was calculated to maintain absolute control, to remind all who witnessed it that the throne, though lonely, could not be challenged. Yet there were moments when even the most controlled facade faltered. A director, tired of mediating endless confrontations, threatened to walk off set. A producer, finally aware of the human cost hidden behind box office numbers, questioned whether these men were worth the turmoil they caused. And then there was the incident Howard hints at, an event so profound it would leave a permanent scar on the studio, the crew, and the actors themselves. It was sudden, unfilmed, a private catastrophe that would ripple across careers, leaving silence in its wake and forcing those who had stayed silent to reconsider the cost of complicity. The tension is suffocating, yet meticulously restrained. Howard's narration paints a vivid portrait of fear and consequence. The subtle shifts in posture, the eyes darting in anticipation of anger, the hushed exhalations of those who knew too much but spoke too little. The chapter crescendos into the realization that the carefully constructed empire of control is no longer sustainable. The actor's dominance, once unchallenged, teeters on the edge of collapse, and the very darkness they wielded to survive now threatens to consume everything around them. As the chapter closes, the audience is left in the eye of this storm. The incident looms like a shadow over Hollywood itself, a private tragedy hidden from the public, yet powerful enough to fracture trust, careers, and reputations. The question lingers, sharp and haunting. When truth finally surfaces, will it consume the legends as it has consumed those they harmed? Time has a way of peeling back layers, revealing the imperfections hidden beneath even the brightest lights. Decades after the cameras stopped rolling, the ghosts of Hollywood's golden age linger, fading stars, whispered rumors, and the echoes of lives quietly reshaped by fear and ambition. Ron Howard steps into this quiet reckoning, his narration calm yet heavy, guiding the audience through the aftermath of decades-long silence. The 6 actors, once titans whose presence could command a room, are now shadows of themselves, their brilliance forever intertwined with the scars they left behind. Howard's omniscient gaze captures the contrast between public memory and private truth. Magazines still reprint their photographs, and films continue to be celebrated, but the intimate realities of manipulation, intimidation, and cruelty remain largely invisible. Crew members who endured years of psychological strain now speak hesitantly, their words measured and wary. Victims carry invisible wounds, careers altered, confidence eroded, dreams quietly abandoned. The psychological echoes persist, lingering like the faint scent of smoke long after a fire has died. Howard does not sensationalize. He observes, he measures, he illuminates. The emotional resonance lies in what is left unsaid, in the tension between admiration and horror. The narrative moves through spaces both physical and temporal. Empty sets, now quiet, speak volumes. Chairs pushed back hastily, props forgotten mid-scene, the faint hum of old studio lights. The audience sees the isolation these actors maintained in life mirrored in the deserted corridors of memory. Howard emphasizes the paradox. Legacy preserves talent, but often erases consequence. What remains of their genius is inseparable from the pain they inflicted, and no amount of accolades can untangle the two. Yet even amid sorrow, there is a subtle emergence of purpose. Some surviving figures in Hollywood begin to confront the past, acknowledging the victims, teaching future generations about the cost of unchecked power. Howard portrays this cautiously. Redemption is tentative, often incomplete but necessary. Memory becomes a tool for accountability. Reckoning, though delayed, provides a fragile sense of justice, even if only in consciousness rather than in statute. As the chapter closes, Howard's narration turns reflective, almost mournful, contemplating the complex architecture of fame and human frailty. The 6 actors' lives are a study in contrasts. Towering success and intimate cruelty, public adoration and private torment, immortal performances and mortal consequences. The audience is left suspended between admiration and sorrow, forced to reckon with the uncomfortable truth that remembering is not the same as forgiving, and silence only ensures the cycle repeats. The final note resonates like a low, haunting chord. The past is never gone, and the legacy of those we idolize carries shadows we may never fully escape.